Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt McKnight, and I'm the Chief Archaeologist here at the Maryland Historical Trust. And I, along with my colleague, Dr. Zach Singer, will be presenting the final paper today, describing a recent project that the MHT Archaeological Research Program has been involved in on the Eastern Shore. It's a 18 CA 261, which we believe to be the 18th century home and ordinary or tavern of James Barwick, which was also part of the first county seat of Caroline County. So Zach and I are going to try and take a tag team approach here, where I'll be covering the background and archival overview for the site, and Zach will be getting into some of the remote sensing and excavation results from the surveys conducted there. So this project and this site first came to our attention because of a chance discovery by a homeowner. They were making some landscaping changes that involved a bit of digging with some heavy equipment. And during the course of that, some colonial artifacts dating to the mid to late 18th century started showing up. Here you can see how this collection, how we first saw it, shards of delftware, creamware, white salt glazed stoneware, and hand-wrought nails on these platters in the homeowner's dining room. Also tobacco pipe stems with narrow bores. So we knew we were dealing with probably a mid to late 18th century site. The homeowners alerted the local historical society, and the local historical society contacted a local archaeologist named Ed Otter, who then reached out to us, and that's how we got involved in the site. So a little bit of background on the site location. It is situated on a low terrace just above the confluence of the Choptank River and Chapel Branch, which was historically known as Ingram's Creek. And it's about 1.4 miles north of Denton, the current county seat. So what can we glean from historic records about this location? Quite a lot, it actually turns out. The site location was first patented in 1667 by John Edmondson of Talbot County as part of a 300-acre parcel called Cedar Point. Edmondson is a fairly famous figure in Maryland history. He was a Quaker merchant and planter who immigrated from Barbados in 1658, and he's pretty well known for being associated with the founding of the Third Haven Meeting House in Talbot County. And that plantation was ultimately also named Cedar Point. So it's a little bit confusing, but Edmondson was the first person to patent it in 1667, and a note included on the back of that patent certificate records the transfer of the full 300-acre parcel to a gentleman named James Shacklady on December 3rd, 1667. Shacklady is not an influential merchant or a political grandee like Edmondson. He actually came to Maryland in 1655 as an indentured servant to William Parker, has a little bit of a checkered history. There's no direct evidence to suggest that Shacklady ever occupied the Cedar Point tract, but he appears to have been living somewhere on Maryland's Eastern Shore by 1671 when he brings his mother and sister over. They joined him in the colony at that time. And then Shacklady is believed to have moved to the Delaware area with his family around 1673. Eventually, the land came to be owned by a Cecil Butler of St. Mary's County. But we've identified no record of how he actually came to possess Shacklady's tract. So this map shows the location of the 17th century Cedar Point tract, as well as several tracts that would come to surround it during the 18th century. It is important to note that there was considerable confusion during much of the 18th century about the boundaries of Cedar Point and the other tracts. Either an initial note-taking error by the land surveyor for Edmondson or a clerk's copying error resulted in the first survey call on the patent certificate for Cedar Point being recorded as running a line from the east bank of the Choptank River, southeast 320 perches to a tract owned by John Ingram. The survey should have been recorded as running east 320 perches. And that mistake results in a very different orientation that you see on the screen now. That has implications not only for Cedar Point, but all the tracts surrounding it. So this southeastern orientation we know is incorrect because it would not have actually reached Ingram's land. Ingram's land was due east of the starting location, and it also created logical impossibilities with regard to subsequent survey calls that are recorded in the patent certificate. So you end up with points that are situated in the middle of creeks and rivers or on the wrong side of them. So it has to have been this eastern orientation. But it created a lot of problems. Eventually, a wealthy plantation owner named Matthew Driver would purchase up all the surrounding lands, have these tracts as well as Cedar Point resurveyed and combined into a new plantation known as Pine Grove in 1795. But until that time, there's a considerable amount of confusion that reigns in the records. So the orientation that's used here on this map is the one that was eventually settled upon for all these tracts. The eastern one is settled on in 1795. So Cecil Butler, however, he came to own Shacklety's Cedar Point tract, sold it to a William Harper in 1730, who then sold it to David Melville 6 years later. And it's with Melville that things start to get interesting. So Melville begins amassing for himself a pretty sizable landholding in what was then still a part of Dorchester County. He patented several new tracts surrounding Cedar Point, including Lookout in 1738, Venture in 1747, in addition to Cedar Point, also in 1747. The patent certificate for addition to Cedar Point is particularly interesting. When it was patented, addition to Cedar Point, which is a triangular wedge in the vicinity of our site, it already contained a small apple orchard, a 40 by 25 foot clapboard tobacco pressing and packing warehouse, a 30 by 20 foot clapboard storehouse, and a 15 by 10 foot clapboard dwelling house, which is described in the patent as old and much shuttered or much shattered. Which is interesting because it means there was an old a house that was already considered old in 1747 that was present there. It seems likely that these structures were situated on the northwest corner of Cedar Point or the eastern edge of addition to Cedar Point near the river for easy access. Again, the surveys prior to 1779 are a bit problematic due to the faulty recordation, but recording the extant structures on the 1747 patent, I believe, was simply a way for Melville to ensure that he held title to the land on which his infrastructure sat, regardless of where the boundary lines for Cedar Point versus its addition actually were. So David Melville held Cedar Point and the surrounding tracts until his death in 1756. The Melville era sold all of these lands to the Lloyds in 1763. And in that same year, the Maryland General Assembly passed a law titled Preventing the Exportation of Bad, Unsound, and Trashy Tobacco. And this was designed to regulate the quality of Maryland tobacco, which was considered inferior to Virginia leaf. And thereby it would hopefully stabilize Maryland tobacco's price within the international market. So Melville's Pricing Warehouse became an official tobacco inspection station in 1763. And it and the general area were called Melville's Warehouse until the end of the 18th century. Now, Caroline County was founded by an act of the General Assembly in December of 1773. And because no actual towns existed within the new county, the county court met in Melville's Warehouse from 1774 until 1790. All these lands were eventually purchased by Colonel Matthew Driver in 1779, and he carved out a 20-acre parcel of county lands for the little settlement that was there. The 1779 deed transferring the Melville and Lloyd parcels to Colonel Matthew Driver, as well as the 1783 patent for the Solomon's Desire tract, provides the location for the home of one James Barwick, and the warehouse at Melville's is also provided. And so that's how things get interesting in these old deeds. From these pieces of evidence, we know that Melville's warehouse lies 100 perches or 1,650 feet below what is described as the gully by the Brigantine Landing. This is a location that all the surrounding land surveys point to. So it's a known location. And then it says further that the James Barwick's dwelling house lies another 20 perches or 330 feet beyond that. So returning to our map of the 18th century tracts, it turns out that the aforementioned gully still exists and it's visible on LIDAR or light detection and ranging images that are acquired by satellites moving overhead. We have LIDAR data from all of Maryland. That's shown at the north end of the map. You can see the gully. Now, if you chart a path 100 perches due south, if that's what you think below means, you end up with a placement for Melville's Warehouse on Ingram's Creek. And we know, in fact, it was on the Choptank River. So the white triangle location is if you go due south, but instead, if below means following the course of the river, you actually end up with a location just north of our site, the black triangle on the map, and then 20 perches beyond that is in fact the approximate distance inland to site site 18 CA 261, or James Barwick's house. So who was James Barwick? Orders of the Caroline County Court between 1774 and 1776 included direction for one James Barwick to locate a suitable room at the settlement within which the county clerk could hold regular hours, where court could be held, and it also dictated that firewood would be at the ready for court use. Now, Barwick received a tavern license from the Caroline County Court on November 24, 1775, and was also ordered to keep the ferry at Melvilles. In November of 1775, Barwick was ordered to make repairs to the county jail, which is described as an old storehouse. So likely that 30 by 20 foot clapboard storehouse that's described alongside the old and much shuttered house, as well as the tobacco packing warehouse at Melvilles. And Barwick was to repair the foundation of the storehouse by placing logs under the sills and sinking them into the ground. So he's taking a earth fast, probably a sill, like a structure that's the sill just laid right on the earth, and he's sinking posts beneath them to provide better support and to turn it into a post in the ground sort of structure. So he was the tavern keeper and caretaker at Melvilles that was kind of in charge of managing this landscape. So let's get back to the present day, or at least 2 years ago. Again, this project started with a call to my office in the spring of 2019. And it leads, well, more than 2 years now. It led to remote sensing surveys in July of 2019 and in June and July of 2020. The property owners were very accommodating, and we were able to tackle this site using 3 different remote sensing techniques: magnetic susceptibility survey, fluxgate gradiometry or magnetometry, and ground penetrating radar. The results of which my colleague Zach Singer is now going to describe to you in detail.
Thanks, Matt. Magnetic susceptibility and gradiometry both document magnetic anomalies in the ground. On archaeological sites, the presence of metallic artifacts, baked bricks, burning events, and buried features containing soils with elevated levels of magnetic oxide can cause these anomalies. Magnetic susceptibility is essentially a measurement of the magnetizability of the soil. This technique uses a coil to emit a magnetic signal and see how the soil responds to it. You can see that coil on the bottom left photo in this slide. Fluxgate gradiometry, which is seen in the right photo on this slide, is a passive technique that uses magnetometers mounted in a series to detect slight differences in the Earth's magnetic field caused by buried objects and features. This technique is not emitting any kind of signal. Instead, it is measuring the Earth's natural magnetic field. Ground penetrating radar is which you can see in the top left photo on this slide, is a non-invasive geophysical technique that uses electromagnetic pulses to detect and delineate subsurface conditions. Subsurface objects like buried foundations or cellars, as well as pits, and stratigraphy in the soil will cause reflections in the signal that are picked up by the receiver. So I'll discuss the results of this tripartite survey at Barwick's over the coming slides. Here you can see the 3 remote sensing survey blocks that were used to collect data over the course of 3 surveys. The first was the magnetic susceptibility and gradiometer survey conducted in 2019. That's in red. Then a return trip for a ground penetrating radar survey in June 2020 is the purple survey that's at a different angle. And then the final GPR survey and gradiometer survey conducted in July 2020 is in blue. You can see on this image of the aerial, the remote sensing survey was conducted primarily in a manicured lawn. However, there were some obstacles, including that pit that Matt mentioned that was excavated that initially found the site, but it was still open during the 2019 and June 2020 survey and acted as an impediment, so we couldn't survey in that area. There are other anomalies as well, including the current road, as well as a small tomato garden, which also will show up in the coming slides. Here are the results of the 2019 magnetic susceptibility survey. The area of high magnetic susceptibility recognized by the orange and red. The area to the left is the modern road. However, in the center of this image is additional areas of high magnetic susceptibility, which will likely represent evidence of past cultural activity. Here are the results of the 2019 gradiometer survey. Again, the areas that are kind of cut out were places that couldn't be surveyed based on current impediments. But nevertheless, looking at the center of this image, there are magnetic anomalies suggestive of anthropogenic or cultural features, which will become clearer in the next survey. So as I mentioned, through the kindness of the landowners, that excavation pit was backfilled, which allowed for a more continuous survey for both the gradiometer as well as the ground penetrating radar in 2020. So here are the results of the 2020 gradiometer survey. You can see at least 8 major clusters of magnetic anomalies. To the left, the high amplitude and low amplitude anomalies on the left are likely associated with the modern tomato gardens. However, in the center of this image are substantial anomalies likely representing clusters of metallic objects, such as nails or other hardware in historic features. And those become even clearer when we compare it with the results of the ground penetrating radar survey. The June 2020 radar survey results are being displayed. You can see a high amplitude anomaly that's rectangular in shape towards the center of this image. And in the top right, you can see those sinuous anomalies, which are likely tree roots. So as is typically the case, we only clipped that rectangular anomaly, and we wanted to get additional information about the landscape and other potential buried archaeological features associated with this rectangular anomaly. So we returned in July of 2020 to conduct a second GPR survey. So I'm going to quickly go through the results of the GPR survey, starting at the surface and working our way down with depth, so you can see how these anomalies present with depth. So here we're at the surface, not much to see. Now we're at 0 to 20 centimeters below the surface, still not much to see. 10 to 30, we're starting to see some tree roots and some other anomalies, which are in the kind of lighter white color. They're starting to peak up even further, 20 to 40 centimeters below surface. And now 30 to 50, they're becoming clearer and starting to become more defined at 40 to 60 centimeters below surface. So you can see that rectangle in the top center, as well as other ovoid anomalies appearing to the south of it. 50 to 70 anomalies persist. 60 to 80, they're still there. And then as we continue down with depth, things start to fade as we impact another natural soil layer. So here is an overall composite image showing the results of the ground penetrating radar survey and the gradiometer survey. So the GPR anomalies are highlighted in blue, and the gradiometer anomalies are highlighted in that burnt orange. Both the gradiometer and the GPR data reveal several anomalies that are suggestive of buried architectural elements. 4 of the 7 GPR anomalies overlap directly with discrete clusters of anomalous magnetism identified through the gradiometry. These anomalies likely indicate the presence of buried architectural features, such as shafts, privies, or storage pits containing metallic objects like nails. So the rectangular anomaly measures approximately 25 feet by 14 feet. The square anomaly, which is the southernmost anomaly, measures approximately 7 feet by 7 feet. And those shaft anomalies are around 6 feet in diameter. So since the spring of 2021, archaeologists with the Maryland Historical Trust, as well as Dr. Julie Markin and students from Washington College, and many volunteers from the Archaeological Society of Maryland, have been conducting ground truthing excavations to test the features that were identified through the remote sensing. So here you can see some of those features that have been investigated. They appear right below the plow zone. So when we hit the natural subsoil, which is in yellow, the features, which are typically brown and have many fragments of brick and mortar, are clearly visible. So you can see the corner of the square anomaly which is highlighted in that lower left image, a corner of the rectangular anomaly in the upper right image, and then a bisected section of one of the ovoid shaft features in the bottom right image, which has interesting stratigraphy and yielded many historic artifacts. Here are some of the interesting artifacts that have been recovered during the excavations: a bone die in the top left, a marked kaolin smoking pipe fragment in the bottom left, with RT for Robert Trippett. And then the top center is a fragment of stoneware with a G, probably for George Rex or King George. And you can see what a full vessel might have looked like on the top right. And then a fragment of a glazed earthenware that's likely a piece of a cauliflower pot, which you can see a complete version on the bottom right. And those both date to the mid 18th century. There are also many interesting prehistoric and contact period artifacts being recovered at Barwick's Ordinary, suggesting a robust Native American occupation on the landform as well. The top left is a green glass trade bead. Top right is a prehistoric incised ceramic. And the bottom image are two late woodland triangle projectile points, likely arrowheads. So we hope to continue excavating at Barwick's Ordinary to continue documenting those subsurface features in the future. And we'd like to thank Joe and Cheryl Smith for providing access to the Barwick's Ordinary site. Also recognize Ed Otter and Jacques Walsh for notifying us of the discovery made by the Smiths, and Pat Melville for providing expert assistance with deciphering a few of the archival records that were providing to be quite challenging. Thank you all for your time.